Back in September of 2011, Super Meat Boy creator Edmund McMillan released The Binding of Isaac on Steam. By 2012, the first expansion, Wrath of the Lamb, was released, and the team also started working on a 3DS port of the game. Somewhat unsurprisingly, Nintendo backed out of that deal, because the game is about a naked child who gets locked in a basement and is having some sort of identity crisis and gender dysmorphia, and uses their tears to fight giant pieces of shit, and it's kind of a difficult thing to explain to someone who hasn't played it before. 2014 saw the release of a remake of the game, The Binding of Isaac: Rebirth, and this one actually did make it onto Nintendo consoles. Since that time, we've seen 3 different expansion packs released for Rebirth, with the latest being Repentance. The game has always had a very strong modding community, and a lot of the ideas in Repentance actually come from a fan-made mod called Anti-Birth. Now, in full disclosure, I do have just over 2,900 hours put into The Binding of Isaac: Rebirth. If you've never played The Binding of Isaac, it's essentially a roguelike dungeon crawler with a top-down view very similar to the old 2D Legend of Zelda games. The combat is similar to something like the console ports of Smash TV or Robotron 2084. You move around with the left stick or D-pad, and then use the face buttons or right stick to shoot in 4 directions. Along your journey, you'll pick up keys to unlock chests and lock doors, as well as bombs to clear obstacles, damage enemies, and uncover secret passageways hidden in levels. At its core, the gameplay is very simple. You enter a room, clear it of enemies, and then move on to the next room. You repeat this process until you reach a boss room, you fight the boss, and if you defeat them, you gain entry to the next floor, where the whole process repeats again. Once you clear a certain number of floors, you will reach a final boss, and at that point, you've essentially completed a run in the game. And while there are a number of sort of predetermined paths that will take you to a final boss, and yes, there are multiple final bosses, almost everything in the game is completely randomized on every playthrough. Each floor takes place in a different realm, so to speak, and the way those realms connect and the sort of general map of the game world doesn't really change. Pretty much everything else in the game is up for grabs when it comes to randomizing. That means enemies, enemy placement, bosses, the layout of the rooms and floor maps, but most importantly, the items you'll pick up. The Binding of Isaac has hundreds of items that modify your character in different ways, and these items also interact with one another in different ways. At the start of any given run, you don't really know what kind of character you'll be playing because you don't know what items you'll get. The more you play the game, not only do you understand better how different items interact with one another, but you also understand how the items interact with the world itself. It can take a while to get to that point, and I do recommend that you play the game with an app or a wiki page open so you can kind of look up what the items are if you don't know what they do. But once you really start to find your footing in the game, you realize there's pros and cons to every item and to every decision, and it's a sort of series of calculated risks that you take, and I think it's a lot of fun. Binding of Isaac was already a massive game, but this latest add-on brings 5,000 new room designs, 100 new achievements, 10 new challenges, 19 new playable characters, over 25 new bosses, over 100 new enemies, new alternate paths and chapters, final bosses, and endings, and the item count is now over 700, with Repentance bringing over 130 new items to the count. There's also a new co-op mode that allows up to 4 people to play the game together at one time. I'm having a ton of fun finding new items and taking on new enemies, but I'm also really impressed by these new lighting effects, reflections. Visually speaking, there's a level of polish that I've never seen before in the series. Now, I should note that at the time of recording here, the game's only been out for a few days. So far, the reviews are mostly positive, and the negative reviews that I've seen all mention the game being difficult and unbalanced. People are complaining that the effectiveness of good items have been decreased, while bad items have gotten a boost. While I understand how someone could feel that way, personally, after 7 years, I really don't mind if items in the game are rebalanced or tweaked in a way that completely changes them. And having played the series for the better part of the last 10 years, I really enjoy how things have been shaken up, and it makes the game feel fresh and new, and it's an exciting challenge. It's definitely not for everyone, but to any fans of the game who are feeling a bit dejected, I recommend you try getting good.